What is up, guys? I haven't been uploading for a few days, but I am back. So I thought I would do an interesting video this morning, or this afternoon rather, talking about what things were like during my exams, how that all went, obviously what I did after my exams, etc., etc. So when I was in year 11, obviously in the build up to leaving school, the one thing that I really wanted to do was something that involved working with animals. So something that was kind of animal care related. I mean, the one thing that I think had been ruled out very quickly was anything to do with the vets because I would not have hoped with that. It was very quickly decided that that was a massive no and obviously a no go kind of route. So obviously, I'd said that I'd be up for working in obviously a pet shop or working on a farm or something like that. I think I decided I didn't want to do anything that I didn't want to do kind of an apprenticeship. That wasn't what that wasn't something that I had to decide to do. But I kind of wanted to go to college, and go from there. That was what I wanted to do, and I kind of made that decision. For a couple of months, that decision had been made. Well, I made that decision that I wanted to go to college. I wasn't interested, in a apprenticeship, even though that option was there. It was for me. It was college that I think was the favourable option, the one that I wanted to do and wanted to, but it was what I wanted to do. Obviously, as I was at school over in South London, I was at Cavendish, and there was actually a farm near there, called Surrey Docks Farm. I remember we actually went there on a school trip once. Um, Basically, select students were chosen to go, and I was one of those students that was chosen, picked out to go on that trip. Um, So obviously we approached them, they kind of turned me down because they couldn't meet my needs, which was a bit of a bummer. Because that was like, I mean, obviously it's not the first, that wasn't the first time I'd heard that, people saying, oh, we can't take him because, we can't meet his needs. It was like, it was like when I was trying to, find activities to do, find a football club to join or something like that. We approached most of the football teams in our local area, and they all said no because they weren't able to meet my needs. They weren't able to cater for people like myself who have special and like have special needs or have like autism or other disabilities or learning difficulties, etc. Um, so obviously we then looked at Haple Manor and they had a site in Leighton called Brooks Farm. Um, and we approached them. Obviously I signed up for that, for them. Done. I think we did like the interviews and everything, and then obviously, and then after, they kind of took me on. But then they were being a bit funny. They said, again, they said they couldn't meet my needs. And I was a little bit kind of, I think the reason that affected me more than anything was because of the fact that, obviously, Surrey Docks Farm had already turned me down for that exact reason. They couldn't meet my needs. And now Brooks Farm was basically saying it, well, Haple Manor was basically saying the exact same thing. And it really did pee me off a little bit. And I think that obviously we kind of had them look her hook, line, and sinker on that one because there was another boy who, funnily enough, I happened to used to be friends with in school. He'd left school, I think it was a year before I left. And he'd gone to Brooks, he'd gone to Haple Manor, he was at the Brooks Farm site. He was on the level 2 course, and he had special needs, but his needs were a lot more complex than what mine were. And they were able to meet his needs absolutely fine. They were able to, they were able to, have him on the course. So why couldn't they meet my needs? I think that they did. I mean, they took me on, but they didn't take me on because they necessarily wanted to. They took me on because they knew that they had to do that. Because if they hadn't taken me on the horse, me and my mum would have had reasonable grounds to have taken further action against them, because we could have taken action against them for discrimination, because they had taken another boy on who was on the level 2 horse, who had special needs, and his needs were a lot more complex than mine were, yet they were saying it couldn't meet my needs. You know, but the thing is, the whole time I was there at Brooks Farm, I never really felt like I belonged there. Like, I never really felt like, if when you've been there, when you've been somewhere for a certain time, or you go to a certain place, it feels like you do belong there. It feels like you're meant to be there. But Brooks Farm didn't feel like that to me. It never felt like I was there, like I was meant to be there, or it was the place that I was meant to be, or I never felt like I belonged there. It always felt really out of place. And I think it was kind of hard because it felt like they didn't want me there, but and it felt hard. It was hard because it felt like they had only taken me on the horse because they knew they had to. They hadn't taken me on the horse because they wanted to do that. They had taken me on the horse purely because they knew that they had no other option, because they knew they had to take me on the horse or risk us, me and my mum taking further action against them if they didn't take me on. But, because of the fact that they had that other student obviously on that level 2 horse who had special needs, and his needs were a lot more complex than what mine were. You know, I mean, obviously, I ended up leaving. I think it was around about the February March time, but it made sense for me to leave anyway, because they had basically said that I wasn't going to be able to get the right rate. I wasn't going to get the right grades, all the necessary grades to be able to actually move on to the level 2 horse, and that really pissed me off, because it just felt like all of the work I'd done from the September up until that point was for nothing, because I wasn't going to get the right grades I needed to actually move on to the level 2 horse. And it's like, why did they even let me why did they even let me start the level 1 horse if they knew that I wasn't going to be able to get the right grades to move on to the level 2 in the front of the level 2 horse in the following September? You know, I was so glad when I left Brooks, because I just felt like I didn't belong there. It never felt like that. Um, and obviously I was out of, I didn't have a placement until the following September, and when I started the sixth form course at Landon Park, that started off, the first, a few months, obviously started off, it all went to plan, it was all going well, and then unfortunately we had the COVID pandemic, which meant that we all had to go into lockdown. We were doing a motor mechanics course at the New City College. We used to go and do that every Monday afternoon. Sadly, we weren't able to complete that course because, unfortunately, COVID, because of the COVID and everything, it meant that we had to go into lockdown, and obviously we had to go onto the online learning, and obviously we weren't able to do, obviously, it meant that we weren't able to complete that course. But we were able to complete the stuff that we did with Tower Project. We were able to complete the fashion stuff online as well via our remote lessons, which was good. So at least we weren't missing out on that. But I think we all were a little bit bummed to, not be able to complete the motor mechanics course. Um, because I think we'd all really gotten into that as well, and it was sad that we weren't able to kind of see that through, and we weren't able to complete that, as the previous Year 12 students had been able to do that, unfortunately, because of COVID rearing its ugly head at a time, at the time. It threw everything into, it just messed everything up. I mean, I remember my mum actually pulled me out of the school about a week before we went into lockdown, because what happened was there was a group of kids that I think it was the year 11 kids from Landon Park. They were going over to France on a field trip, like on a residential trip, and they were staying in an area of France that had been like heavily affected by the coronavirus. And my mum was a little bit worried. She was a bit worried that the students had come back from France start spreading COVID around the school, and obviously with me having, multiple members of my family who were, you know, who were at high risk, due to health reasons, like my granddad, for example, who obviously had COPD and had leukemia, which had met him, basically, which had left him immunocompromised, and we just couldn't take that, we could not take that risk of him getting ill with COVID because it could, for him it could have been deadly if he had gotten it. Um, so obviously my mum pulled me out of the school. I stopped attending for a while. And then obviously, well, we only to lock down a week later anyway. And then I went back with along with all the other students when the school reopened in the September. Because to be honest, I think at first we all thought that schools and stuff were only going to be shut for a few months. We didn't realise they were going to be shut all the way up until the September, which unfortunately they were. And when we went back, I remember it was before we went off, we went into lockdown. There weren't really any kind of guidelines or strict rules being enforced in the school. They weren't enforcing the wearing of face masks. Hand sanitizing wasn't a major thing at the time. You know, it was something you did if you wanted to do. Obviously, if you wanted to sanitize your hands, you could do that, but you weren't being forced. We weren't being forced to do that. But when we went back after lockdown, things like wearing face masks, um, and obviously hand sanitizing and social distancing and things like that were a lot more enforced. At the time, obviously, there really was a lot, it was a lot, the rules were a lot stricter. Same with Tower Project. When we were in classes at Tower Project, we had these like screens on our table. And obviously, we had to make sure we always had those screens on our table. We had hand sanitizer on our table. When it came to the end of the day, we had to wipe our screens down before the staff touched them. Clean all our tables, clean our chairs, things, sanitize our chairs and things like that. That was one of the things that was being heavily enforced at Tower Project, along with social distancing rules. And there were a lot of signs up there, in making sure that people were remembering the 2 meter social distancing, things like that. We had to make sure we were always wearing our face masks and all that. So it was a crazy time. And then obviously I only ended up staying at Landon Park for a few more months, and then I ended up coming out of Landon Park and not going back because again, it was that was down to COVID. Obviously, COVID cases have started to really increase in Landon Park. Like every week, there were students and staff testing. But it seemed like every week there were students and staff testing positive for COVID. There were multiple year groups that had been affected, that had students or staff that tested positive for COVID. And that worried me a little bit because obviously I was like, it scared me. It scared me, and I was like, I don't want to be going into the school right now because there's so many people coming down with COVID. I can't take that risk. So I didn't. I obviously, when I went, so obviously we moved onto the year 13 course in September, and we were only doing 1 day a week. At Land of, I was the only one from the Land of Park school that actually chose to do the Tower Project. All of the others chose to do fashion. But obviously, I chose to do I chose to do the Tower Project stuff. And I was like, and I was enjoying it. I was doing that 4 days a week on a Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then I was at school. I was at Landon Park on the Tuesday. And then obviously they started getting a bit funny about that, saying if I didn't go back to school, I wasn't going to be able to carry on with the Tower Project. But we sorted that out. I was still kind of continuing on with the Tower Project, and then I left there due to safety issues. And then I was out of again. I didn't have a placement for a few months, and then I started at the West Ham Foundation up at Beckton. And I started going there for a couple of weeks and then stopped attending because, again, COVID, and there was this new COVID variant. I think it was the Omicron variant, which had been discovered at the time, and that cases of that variant were starting to arise, and that again concerned me a little bit. So obviously I stopped going there. I had a job I had an escort that would, take me to and from, that would accompany me to and from there every day. Well, on the phone. But even then, I wasn't doing that like full time. I used to go for 2 hours on a Wednesday afternoon for about two. I used to go there for about 2 hours, and then I used to go there for about half an hour on a Thursday. So I wasn't doing it. I wasn't going there like full time. I was only going there for 2 days a week, and even then I wasn't doing the full day. I was only doing the 2 hours on a Wednesday afternoon and then half an hour on a Thursday, which was like, well, and for me, I think, I was better doing, it would have been better for me to do something that I was doing full time. And then obviously from then I went on to Tower Project. I went on to Project Search in September of 2022, and I graduated from that in the summer of 2023, and then that's it really. But yeah, it's been a roller coaster time for me since I left school. Obviously we're now talking 8 years, no, 7 years since I left school, because I left in 2018. I mean, it still feels weird when I say that it's been 7 years since I left school, because it just doesn't feel like it's been that long, but it actually has. And I feel like so much has changed for me in that space of time. Like, I've been through so many different programs, things haven't done so well, I've been moved on to another program, that didn't go so well, you know, it was always the same case where I would start one program, things started off okay, but then they went pear shaped, and that happened a lot. You know, for me, that move from school to college wasn't easy. Um, you know, but I mean, obviously, I feel like I'm doing better now than I was. I don't feel like those foul placements have, ever really affected me that much. I think at the time, I mean, thinking back to Brooks, when I was doing that, and they said to me that, that they couldn't meet my needs, they were being funny about that. As I said, I think the reason that affected me so much was the fact that I'd already been turned down by Surrey Docks Farm for that exact same reason. And now Brooks Farm was basically saying, at Haple Manor were basically saying the exact same thing. And it hurt. It kind of hurt a little, when people said that, oh, we can't take him, we don't know if we can meet his needs. Like, it was like, for fuck's sake, you know, I've been turned down by Surrey Docks Farm, and now Brooks Farm, and now Haple Manor are being funny, you know. Um, but I think, as I said, I think the good thing there was that we did kind of have them hook, line, and sinker on that one. Because obviously they had another student in the school who had special needs, and their needs were a lot more complex than what mine were. Um, and I mean, obviously, I think that kind of sort of tied their hands a little bit. They knew they had to take me on the horse, even though they probably didn't. I think they didn't particularly want to do that. I think they knew they had no other choice. Yeah, I thought I would, talk a little bit about that. I thought it would be an interesting, subject to talk about. It's not something I've ever really spoken about that much on my channel. And just because, I faced a lot of bumps in the road when I left school, doesn't mean that things won't be smooth running for you. I think, things will go well for you when when you leave school. You're not, you don't, you shouldn't worry about things going wrong. You shouldn't worry about things, about failing hard, about failing anything. But you're not gonna do that. You just gotta stay focused and work hard. That's what we can really do. I mean, and all that, and I will say good luck. Hopefully this goes, everything goes well for you in your when it comes to, obviously what you go on to do, whatever it is you go on to do. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll see you for another one soon.